At just 15 years old, an age when most teenagers are still in school, living carefree lives, he committed a crime that shocked an entire community. With more than 128 knife wounds, he took the lives of an elderly couple. The horrifying number seemed only the beginning of the cruelty that followed. After the victims had died, the attacker continued to carry out disturbing acts on their bodies. The crime scene was deeply disturbing. The victims' bodies were severely mutilated, and blood was found throughout the house. Internal organs had been removed, and everyday objects such as a mobile phone, drinking cups, and other household items were forced into the bodies. Even experienced investigators were shaken by the brutality they witnessed. What made the case even more frightening was that the desire to kill had not appeared suddenly. From around the age of 10, he had already developed violent thoughts and had even set a personal goal of becoming a serial killer one day. After the case became public, the media gave him a chilling nickname, calling him the criminal child of California. For thousands of years, philosophers have debated the true nature of human beings, whether people are born good or whether evil exists within from the beginning. This case seemed to revive that ancient question once again. So what exactly happened? To understand the story, we must go back to the year 2013, when one of the most shocking crimes occurred in the state of California in the United States. California has long been known as a vibrant and prosperous region. Towering mountains, vast forests, and long stretches of coastline have created landscapes admired around the world. Millions of visitors travel there every year, attracted by both its beauty and its energy. Yet, behind this bright image, a horrifying tragedy unfolded that shocked the entire nation. In the city of Davis, a place known for its peaceful environment and academic atmosphere, there lived a large multi-generational family sharing close ties. The family included children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, forming a household that numbered several dozen people. Not all of them were related by blood, but they were brought together through the later life marriage of two individuals. At the center of the family were Oliver and Maureen. Oliver was born in 1925. As a young man, he served in the United States Navy during World War II. After leaving military service, he studied law at UCLA and later at Berkeley, eventually becoming a respected attorney. Beyond his legal career, he remained active in community life. He served on school boards, participated in civic organizations, and helped establish a local church. He also played music for many years as a member of a local folk band. From a previous marriage, he had 6 children and had also raised 2 adopted children. After his divorce, he believed he would spend the rest of his life alone. Instead, he later met Maureen, a woman more than 10 years younger than him. Maureen was known as a gentle and kind person. She worked at the local church and was remembered for her warm personality and friendly smile. Before meeting Oliver, she had also experienced a failed marriage and had 3 children of her own. The two found comfort and understanding in each other and soon decided to build a life together. In 1996, they married, and their 2 families became one large household. For many years afterward, they lived quietly and peacefully. Their days were filled with simple routines, such as gardening, walking together, and spending time with their children and grandchildren. Everything remained calm until the 14th of April, 2013. On that day, the couple did not appear at church as they usually did. Oliver also failed to attend a musical gathering he had participated in for nearly 50 years. Their unusual absence began to worry their children. Mary called several times, but received no answer. Robert rushed to the house to check. He knocked on the door, but heard nothing inside. Believing his parents might be out, he left without using the spare key. However, other members of the family began to feel that something was seriously wrong. After repeated attempts to reach her mother failed, the daughter insisted on calling the police. That same evening, officers quickly arrived at Oliver's residence. The front gate was still locked, the house was dark, and the surroundings were unnaturally quiet, as if no one had been home for days. When knocking produced no response, the officers walked around to the back of the house. There, they noticed that a rear window was slightly open, and the mosquito screen had been torn. Shining flashlights through the glass, they could vaguely make out two figures lying motionless on a bed. A strong, disturbing odor was already present. Realizing something was seriously wrong, the officers forced their way inside. The moment they entered the bedroom, they were confronted with a scene that would remain in their memories forever. Two bodies lay on the bed, severely mutilated and barely recognizable. Blood covered almost every surface, and the victims' bodies showed extensive injuries. In some areas, internal organs had been removed. The victims were identified as Oliver and Maureen. According to the medical examiner, the deaths likely occurred in the early hours of April 14. Oliver had at least 65 injuries, including 61 stab wounds concentrated around the neck, chest, arms, and legs. 3 fatal wounds were located on the right side of his neck, where a major artery had been severed. A drinking cup had been forced into his abdominal cavity. Maureen had at least 74 injuries, including dozens of stab wounds. Several of her teeth had been broken, and her face showed severe trauma. A large Y-shaped incision extended from the rib area down toward the navel. Inside her abdomen, investigators discovered a black Nokia mobile phone that had been deliberately inserted. The condition of the bodies indicated that the attacker had continued to interfere with the victims, even after death. The amount of blood at the scene was so overwhelming that even experienced officers struggled to remain composed. Some investigators had to turn away, unable to continue looking directly at the bodies. Veteran forensic personnel later described the crime as one of the most disturbing cases they had ever encountered. Some expressed disbelief that such cruelty could be committed by a human being. The brutality of the crime shocked not only the small community, but the entire state of California. The Federal Bureau of Investigation treated the case with great seriousness and assigned special agents to assist local authorities with the investigation. At the scene, investigators found a partial shoe print on a sofa near the open window. The print contained traces of soil and plant material. However, closer examination revealed that the impression lacked clear details. Only the general outline of the shoe remained visible. Investigators suspected the attacker may have covered the soles with tape to conceal identifying features. Fingerprints recovered from the window frame, door handles, and other areas all belonged either to the victims or to family members. No unknown fingerprints were found. This suggested that the attacker had carefully planned the crime. Investigators also noted that no valuables appeared to be missing from the house. This indicated that robbery was unlikely to be the motive and suggested the possibility of a personal grudge. Because the victims belonged to a large and complex family, detectives considered the possibility that the killer might be someone within the family circle, possibly driven by resentment or disputes over inheritance. The damaged window screen and faint shoe print near the window were considered possible attempts to mislead investigators. Authorities suspected the attacker may actually have entered through the front door using a key. Based on this theory, police began closely examining family members. This phase of the investigation produced significant developments. After multiple interviews and background checks, 2 relatives attracted particular attention. Oliver's son Robert and his grandson Tony. First, On the day of the incident, Robert had come to the house after failing to reach his parents. Despite having a spare key, he did not enter the house and instead left shortly afterward, which investigators found suspicious. Second, shortly after the murders, Robert removed the carpets inside the house, raising concerns that evidence might have been destroyed. Third, investigators discovered a strange graffiti drawing inside Robert's home. The drawing depicted a shadowy figure holding a knife beside a bed where a person was lying. The image closely resembled the crime scene. Robert claimed that the drawing had been made years earlier by his son Tony, who had certain psychological difficulties, and insisted that it had no connection to the murders. Police remained unconvinced. They began to suspect that Tony might be involved and that Robert's unusual behavior might have been an attempt to protect his son. However, Tony appeared to have no clear motive, and no direct evidence linked him to the crime. Neighbors and relatives described him as a quiet and well-behaved teenager who had a close relationship with his grandparents. With no solid leads, the investigation reached a dead end. 2 months later, on June 16, a phone call to the police changed everything. A 17-year-old student contacted authorities and claimed that his close friend Daniel, aged 15, was the true killer of Oliver and Maureen. Shortly afterward, Daniel's girlfriend also came forward and reported him to the police. When officers first heard these statements, their immediate reaction was disbelief. It seemed impossible that a 15-year-old boy could have committed such a brutal and horrifying crime. Even so, after careful consideration, investigators decided to examine Daniel as a possible suspect. If the accusations were true, ignoring them would be a serious mistake. Gradually, a darker reality began to emerge. Daniel Wozniak was born on the 14th of April, 1997, in Davis, California, into a troubled household marked by constant tension and violence. His father, Bill, had a volatile temper and often lashed out when frustrated, shouting, breaking objects, and physically abusing family members. His mother endured years of fear and pressure in this unstable environment. Eventually, she could no longer tolerate the situation and asked for separation. In 2008, when Daniel was only 10 years old, he saved his father's life during a heart attack by performing CPR. The act earned him praise from the American Red Cross and even local media attention. Despite this, his father's behavior did not change, and the violence at home continued. Disappointed and exhausted, Daniel's mother finally left the household. She later began a relationship with Daniel's kindergarten teacher in an attempt to rebuild her life. Daniel's older sister accepted the situation and believed their mother deserved happiness, but Daniel reacted very differently. He became deeply resentful and felt that someone had taken his mother away from him. He began imagining violent revenge against the man he believed had replaced his father. At 11 years old, Daniel spoke openly to a doctor about thoughts of killing. He was diagnosed with adjustment disorder and depression and began receiving medication. Between 2010 and 2011, his mental condition deteriorated rapidly. He suffered frequent nightmares, sudden outbursts of anger, and severe loss of appetite. His weight dropped to around 43 kilograms, and he required extended treatment. At school, his behavior became increasingly disturbing. During art classes, he often drew violent images filled with blood and weapons. He sometimes told classmates that if he were ever arrested for murder, he would pretend to be insane. He also developed a strong fascination with notorious serial killers, studying figures such as Ted Bundy and Jeffrey Dahmer. He spent long periods watching graphic horror films and even discussed plans for harming people he disliked, including one of his girlfriend's former partners. Several classmates reported seeing him deliberately start small fires and mistreat animals. These incidents frightened those around him. In December 2012, Daniel revealed his violent fantasies to a school counselor. After the school notified authorities, he was required to undergo psychiatric treatment. Only weeks later, he told a psychologist that he wanted to carry out a large-scale killing and become a serial murderer. His repeated violent thoughts clearly indicated a serious danger. Unfortunately, these warnings did not receive the level of attention they deserved. Authorities largely viewed him as a troubled teenager rather than a genuine threat. After treatment and medication, people around him assumed the situation had improved and stopped paying close attention. Meanwhile, Daniel continued drifting deeper into a dark psychological state. Ironically, not long after the murders, he was even recognized at school for good behavior and named Student of the Month. Soon afterward, however, he was expelled for bringing a knife onto campus. When federal investigators reviewed his background, they concluded that Daniel represented a potentially dangerous individual with severe psychological instability. Even so, linking him directly to the murders of Oliver and Maureen still seemed difficult to accept. To clarify the situation, police summoned Daniel for questioning on June 17. The 15-year-old sat across from investigators with slightly messy blonde hair and a youthful face that still showed traces of childhood. Beneath that appearance, however, there was something unsettling in his manner. Maintaining an indifferent expression, he listened quietly as an experienced detective began the interrogation. Rather than accusing him directly, the investigator used a gradual psychological approach, beginning with ordinary questions and slowly increasing pressure. At first, Daniel appeared composed. As the questioning continued, his eyes began to shift away, his body tensed slightly, and his fingers twisted together unconsciously. None of these details escaped the investigator's attention. Daniel repeatedly insisted that he had nothing to do with the murders. Yet despite his denials, his body language and subtle reactions suggested deep anxiety that he could not fully conceal. The police took the opportunity to present information about Daniel's background, including a history of troubling behavior, psychological disorders, and violent tendencies. Daniel appeared unusually open, admitting that he suffered from neurological problems and had been taking medication for a long time. He also acknowledged a strong fascination with blood and violence. Despite this, he firmly denied committing murder. He even blamed a close friend for attacking animals, speaking as if he had nothing to do with it. Seeing how stubborn he remained, investigators decided to play their strongest card. They presented recorded phone calls in which Daniel's close friend Tom and his former girlfriend had reported suspicious behavior. As soon as the recordings began to play, Daniel's expression changed instantly. His eyes shifted away, and his body language became tense and unsettled. Under continuous pressure from the interrogator, Daniel gradually realized that escape was becoming impossible. After 3 hours and 38 minutes of questioning, he finally confessed. He began to describe in detail everything that had happened on the night of the crime. Late on the night of the 13th of April, 2013, Daniel lay awake, restless and unable to sleep. He decided that the violent fantasies he had repeated in his mind for so long would finally become reality. Around 2 o'clock in the morning, he prepared himself carefully. He wrapped tape around the soles of his shoes, wore gloves, dressed entirely in black, and armed himself with a knife about 6 inches long. Wearing a black mask, he quietly left the house. He wandered alone through the silent neighborhood, like a hunter searching for prey. After checking more than 50 houses, he finally noticed that a rear window at Oliver's home was slightly open. The house was only 2 doors away from his father's residence. Without hesitation, he removed the insect screen and quietly slipped inside the living room, hiding in the darkness as he waited. When he heard steady breathing from the bedroom, Daniel slowly approached the bed. He stood there, staring at the sleeping couple for nearly 10 minutes. During that time, his body trembled slightly, filled with excitement and anticipation. Because it was his first time killing, he was inexperienced and unable to end their lives quickly. Instead, he struck again and again, almost experimentally. The victims struggled and begged for mercy, pleading for their lives. But to Daniel, those sounds only fueled the darkness within him. He lost control completely and continued attacking until both victims stopped breathing. Afterward, he began conducting disturbing experiments on the bodies. He removed internal organs, inserted cups, a mobile phone, and other objects into the bodies, and attempted crude dissections. When he finished, he returned home. Daniel hid the blood-stained clothes and the murder weapon in a corner of his mother's storage area, keeping them like trophies. He showed no remorse. Instead, he felt overwhelming excitement and satisfaction. He boasted to friends and to his girlfriend about what he had done, describing it as the most fulfilling night of his life. He was already thinking about the possibility of another attack. During the interrogation, Daniel calmly described the events while eating and drinking, speaking without urgency. His tone was steady and relaxed, as if he were describing a game rather than a brutal crime. His cold and emotionless account filled the interrogation room with a heavy silence. The words coming from the face of that young teenager sounded colder than those of a hardened serial killer. Police later discovered the blood-stained clothing and the knife used in the attack hidden in a cabinet in the garage at his mother's house. At that point, the chain of evidence was complete. Daniel was clearly the perpetrator. After 2 months, the investigation concluded and the case moved toward trial. Although Daniel was still under 18, the extreme severity of the crime led prosecutors to charge him as an adult. His request for bail was denied. On the 6th of May 2014, the trial began. The prosecutor stated, "In 28 years in the justice system, I have never seen a crime so disgusting and brutal, and I have never faced a defendant with such a deeply disturbed nature." Daniel faced 2 counts of first-degree murder, along with several aggravating factors, including the use of a weapon. He refused to plead guilty. Instead, he claimed that he had been mentally unstable at the time of the crime and should therefore not be held criminally responsible. He argued that he should be placed in a psychiatric hospital rather than a prison. His defense attorney supported this argument by pointing to Daniel's long history of mental illness and the effects of medication, attempting to convince the jury that he had been psychologically unstable. The defense also questioned the interrogation process, suggesting that there were legal concerns regarding the way the confession had been obtained. Police investigators maintained a clear position. Daniel had acted with careful planning and deliberate preparation. The taped shoes and gloves showed that he had taken steps to avoid leaving evidence. The crime was not impulsive. His behavior demonstrated anticipation and intent. The post-mortem mutilation of the bodies revealed a deeply disturbed obsession with violence. On the 26th of May 2014, after 4 weeks of trial, the jury needed less than 2 hours to reach a unanimous decision, declaring that all charges were proven. Although Daniel was tried as an adult, he had been only 15 years old at the time of the crime. Under California law, he was not eligible for the death penalty or life imprisonment without parole. Daniel was ultimately sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after serving 52 years. However, under California Senate Bill 260, he qualified as a juvenile offender eligible for parole review after 25 years. This meant he could potentially return to society as early as the age of 42. Min's daughter broke down in tears and said that her mother had treated everyone with kindness throughout her life. She had always been willing to help others and had been a source of strength and support. If her mother were still alive, she would have helped the family endure this tragedy. Instead, Daniel had brutally taken her life simply to satisfy his twisted desires. After the trial ended, Daniel was taken into custody. Many believed the case was finally closed, but new developments soon followed. In 2016, California passed Proposition 57, a law requiring that decisions about whether juveniles should be tried as adults must be made by juvenile court judges instead of prosecutors. The law applied retroactively to cases that were not yet fully resolved. Based on this legislation, the California Court of Appeal ruled on the 22nd of May 2018 to overturn Daniel's 2014 conviction and reopen judicial proceedings. A new hearing was ordered to determine whether he should continue to serve his sentence under the adult court ruling. The decision immediately sparked widespread public debate. Prosecutors, the victims' families, and many citizens strongly opposed the new law. Later that year, perhaps recognizing the possibility of a different outcome, the defense released an emotional video statement from Daniel. In the video, he described a painful childhood, expressed regret, and claimed that there were no evil people in the world, only wounded individuals. The video was removed from online platforms after only 2 days. Meanwhile, as the new hearing approached on the 30th of May 2018, California Governor Jerry Brown signed Senate Bill 1391, often referred to as an amnesty-style law. The law stated that offenders under 16 years old could not be transferred to adult court for prosecution. In juvenile court, even serious offenders would generally be released by the age of 25. This law once again gave hope to Daniel's defense team. Despite strong objections from the victims' families, the governor maintained that young offenders deserved the opportunity for rehabilitation. The decision triggered another wave of public criticism. In a letter addressed to the governor, prosecutors emphasized that Daniel had brutally attacked and murdered an elderly couple. They warned that his extreme violence suggested a high risk of reoffending if released. Daniel's defense attorneys quickly attempted to use the new law to delay the hearing and transfer the case back to juvenile court, but the request was denied. The hearing proceeded as scheduled. During the proceedings, Daniel personally addressed the court and presented himself as remorseful. Prosecutors emphasized the cold and calculated nature of the crime, arguing that his obsession with violence and bloodshed would not easily change. Psychological evaluations showed a psychopathy score of 35.8, one of the highest levels experts had encountered. The findings indicated that Daniel had been fully conscious and deliberate when committing the murders. The victims' families insisted that Daniel had never shown genuine remorse and warned that releasing him would create unpredictable dangers. Residents of the city also expressed strong opposition, sending approximately 300 signed letters to the court, urging that the original sentence be maintained. On the 24th of October 2018, the judge accepted the prosecution's arguments and ruled to uphold Daniel's original sentence. He emphasized that the case was extraordinarily rare and complex, marked by extreme brutality and disturbing methods that shocked even experienced observers. After years of legal disputes, the case finally reached its conclusion. Daniel is currently incarcerated at Richard J. Donovan Correctional Facility in San Diego. He has filed several appeals since then, but all have been denied. He will remain in prison and will only become eligible for parole at the age of 42. There was also another tragic victim connected to this case. During the early stages of the investigation, police focused on Tony, an innocent teenager. She was repeatedly questioned, surrounded by media attention, and isolated by the community. Although she was eventually cleared of suspicion, the stigma never disappeared. After 3 years of silence and loneliness, Tony ultimately took her own life. Looking back, this case was not only a story of murder, but also a complex reflection on human nature, education, and the justice system. In Daniel's background, there were signs of mental illness, family violence, emotional isolation, and social neglect. Whether these factors created a monster, or whether the seeds of violence had always existed within him, remains a question without a clear answer. That concludes today's video. See you in the next one. Goodbye.